All right. Good morning, and thank you for joining this morning. Does everybody know what today is? If somebody says Monday,
NFL hangover day.
NFL hangover day. That was a pretty good game. It didn't go the way I wanted it, but it was an exciting game nonetheless. So glad everybody's recovered and on the call. Hey, this is the third part of our REPC series. The first one was buyer obligations. Second one was seller obligations. And today we are going to cover some other, what will we call them, supplementary issues with the REPC. And by the time we're done today, you guys will be all experts. And D, just so you know, I have not forgotten your request. D is the only one, and it's sad to say, the only one who has requested the marked up copies, the highlighted, underlined copies that I use in these presentations for their REPC. So if you want that from me, go ahead and send me an email, and D, you don't have to because I remember. All right, let's get underway. First of all, any successes in the past week? Anything anybody want to share in regards to your business, to what we learn here on these Mondays? Anything you want to share?
Hi.
Hi, Kat. Thank you. That was better than nothing. I mean, listen, so, it's kind of funny. As principal broker, I get called from other agents, from other brokers. I get them on the weekend. And I had an interesting one. We'll just kick it off with this, right? So we talked about the three sections, right? Settlement, closing, possession, right? They're all interwoven. And lo and behold, Friday night, got a call from one of my agent, a good agent, does a good book of business up in our Layton office. And he said, "Hey, I've got a problem." I'm like, "Yeah, that's probably why you're calling at 8:30 at night on a Friday." And he said, "Yeah, so kind of pissed off for my buyers here. We were representing the buyers, and settlement was at 5 o'clock on Friday." He said, "We came in and settled yesterday, Thursday, and the sellers waited until 4:30 to come in and sign. When they're done signing, title company tried to get stuff over to the county at 4:45. What are the odds? Come on." So settlement had taken place. New deed was not recorded, but was signed. And so technically, like, ownership is there. And he said, "So my people like have their stuff ready to move, and the sellers didn't get done in time, so the deed wasn't recorded at the county. So since
recording in progress."
What's that? Oh, I'm getting an echo from somebody. That's okay. Anyway, so the question was this: well, since the new deed is signed and everything, don't we have ownership, and shouldn't we be able to move in? What's the answer from the group? And not just, I'm not going to let you off that easy. And why? Why is your answer what it is?
No.
Okay.
No, because it's not recorded.
What does that have to do with anything, Bill?
That's when they legally own the property.
According to what?
According to the county and the legal records and the contract.
And
something else could get recorded ahead of it, and the lender wouldn't like that.
yeah, they wouldn't like that. What I'm going for is it's contained in the contract, guys.
No, did you not hear me say contract?
I didn't hear that part, Bill. That's okay. Yeah, if this is where it becomes advantageous to have been on calls like this, so it, not so that you can play contract REPC trivia pursuit. That has very limited value, although it is kind of cool. I ought to invent a game. But no, it's so that one, hopefully we can future pace our clients. So my conversation with the agent was, "Hey, listen, I have all the empathy in the world for your client, right? It's unfortunate that the seller would do that, but guess what? They're operating within the constraints of the contract that both parties willingly signed, right? And when it says that closing has not completed until one of those items is that the new deed is recorded, ownership is recorded at the county, then closing has not completed. Therefore, The third section, which is possession, doesn't kick in yet. Whatever it says, if it's 24 hours, immediately, 48 hours, it doesn't kick in until section 2 is already done. So even though the agent was right, if the deed's already in their name, yeah, they technically have ownership, and it's an administrative thing to just get it recorded at the county, if that's all we were worried about. The problem is we have a contract with very specific terms. I want you to remember this term. When attorneys get down to litigating stuff like this, there's like common legal doctrines that get brought up. And one of them is 4 corners of the contract. Who wants to take a stab at what that means? It's pretty intuitive, guys. That is like low-hanging fruit. That's an easy one to answer. If there's language in the 4 corners of the contract, it governs, right? And if it's not in there, then we can speculate all we want. So my point is, the closing section is very clear. It is in the 4 corners of the contract, therefore the contract will govern. Make sense? So what I told the agent was, this is, you know, the school of hard knocks sometimes has a high tuition and it's a little painful. And so it's like, this is a great learning experience for you. And he's been in the business a lot of years. And it's like, you need to make sure that if, and this is, Parker, you and I've been affiliated for over 20 years, I think. And this is something I've advocated far and wide. If you want them to move in on the weekend, if you don't want to have that unpleasant call of, I have everything in my moving truck and I can't move in and I don't know what I'm going to do, and you're going to have to pay for a hotel or what, if you want to avoid that, one, explain the contract and those 3 sections, right? And how they're linked, right? And so if you need to be moving in on the weekend, then don't put settlement on Friday. Make sure it's Wednesday, maybe Thursday, right? That way it has time to get funded. That's the first key. And then recorded at the county. And then you can move in on Saturday, right? So lack of preparation on our part, lack of understanding the terms of the contract and the ramifications or the potential ramifications of the contract. When that happens to us as an agent, we want to point the finger at everybody else. And I have the dubious task of sometime taking the hand and turning it around and saying, hey, guess who's responsible? That was you, right? You need to take better care of your clients. So there you go. That was just a teaser to get us back in the mindset of why the terms in the REPC are so important. So let me
just an FYI, Morgan County Recorder's Office is closed on Fridays.
Yeah, and then there's things like that. So that's Don being a great agent. He now knows if he wants to have him in by the weekend, he's probably got to be signing no later than late Tuesday to guarantee that they're going to be able to get in. So good point, Don. Always know your local municipality, right? All right, I'm going to share.
You know, Matt,
yeah.
If I could add a quick footnote, something else that can occur is the agent on the other side calls that morning and says, oh, good news, we're table funding. And if you haven't been aware of that and the contract just gives a time period, that can be a pushback and a little battle as well.
Well, how so? Go ahead and enlighten on that.
Well, let's just say that, you know, everybody has signed on Thursday with possession to be 48 hours or after, something along that line, and you're anticipating it will roll to be Monday when it all happens. And then you get this good news call, and then they want to be moving in on Saturday afternoon, and the sellers aren't ready for that. So
Okay.
I've learned to always specify in an addendum when the possession will be on or by or before, you know, and it just helps to save that heart going to your throat when you get that type of call.
Such a good point. If timeline is critical, then get specific, right? Then get specific. And oh, by the way, just because the buyer goes in and signs early doesn't mean there's an obligation for the seller to go in and sign early, as per what I just had this weekend. I had one in our own company where, and listen, I hope you understand, I don't want to make people's lives inconvenient, but when we represent a seller, the agent and me as the broker, we're to look out for their best interests, what's in their best interest, not what is nice for everybody, right? And so these sellers, apparently they couldn't move into their new construction, before the following Monday, just because of the hang up with the builder. And so it was literally that situation where the buyers had come in and signed on Wednesday. Settlement was Friday. There were no specific times, so the default in the contract was 5 o'clock. They came in and signed at 4:45, right? So that they could stay in their own house for an additional 2 days. Is that scummy? Or is it just what's already pre-agreed upon in the contract and they're exercising their rights there's nothing hidden there. I mean, if you're representing the buyer, your dialogue should be, if this played out to its extreme, here's how long the sellers could be in. I don't know. That just seems like a reasonable approach to make sure my buyer's aware and are not frustrated. Okay. All right.
I have one word.
Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Communication.
Yeah, I don't know.
Like as you're getting down the trail end, it should be all about communicating with the other agent and knowing, and so there's no fight at the end.
Oh, Bill, I'm actually glad you brought that up because I was about ready to move on, but you bring up such a key point. We've done all this work, right? From not only finding a client, buyer or seller, to finding the property, to negotiating on a REPC, getting accepted, going through due diligence, going through finance, going through all that stuff. And we get to the culminating event. And if we don't do it well at the end, even though we can justify our position almost always, if we're somehow in the midst of something that doesn't go well to where the buyers and sellers are angry at each other, it is quite often that we come across as part of the problem, whether right or wrong. It comes off as we were part of the problem, and the chance of them doing a deal with us again is not so high, right? So this is the time where it should be a culmination of all your skills and all your hard work and bringing it together, and Bill hit the nail on the head. Communication is always, always, always at the center of these issues. Okay. All right. So having said that, we've already covered buyers' responsibilities, sellers' responsibilities. I'm just going to quickly touch a few things on the first part of the contract, and then we're going to kind of spend our time in the mid to late part of the contract. So the first one is, I know this is redundant, but I need to say it because I've got some office managers on here, and I hope they appreciate that I'm covering this yet again. Earnest money. I highlighted the responsibility of the client is to deliver to the brokerage within 4 calendar days after acceptance. And then the brokerage has 4 calendar days in which to deposit. So no office managers can answer this question. How does a company like Earnest with 2 N's that facilitates earnest money deposit, how does that impact these 2 deadlines? Anybody want to give a go on that?
I don't understand your question.
If you're going to use a electronic or an online company for your client to transfer earnest money, pretty easy the first part, right? Okay, we have a document that says, yep, they went ahead and initiated. How do we ensure that the company has deposited it in the trust account within 4 additional days?
Can I answer
Yeah.
can I respond to your question with a question?
Please go ahead.
Does Earnesty directly deposit the money into the trust account?
Yeah, good question. So Earnest came online about 4 years ago. They're a nationwide company. And basically it's the concept here, this is a little teaching moment. It makes it easier and it wipes out fraud. They've done this for 4 years nationwide, and they have not a single case of earnest money fraud, which is pretty incredible. Everything they do will make sense to you, but they use the plaid system. It's tokenized. We never see the client's account information, and Earnest with 2 M's, that's the company's name, they never see the client's information. So that's what drastically reduces the opportunity for fraud. But Parker, to your question, yes, we set up as a vendor with them. So when our agents go in and initiate, hey, we're under contract and my client wants to transfer earnest money through your system, we go ahead and put in the property address, meaning we, the client, the agent puts in the address, puts in the amount of the earnest money, and then Earnest, the company, initiates interaction with our client and says, hey, congratulations, blah, blah, blah. Here's how much you need to do by way of a ACH transfer. And there's some protocol to that. I'm not going to get into all that. But once they initiate that, we get a notice. We get a notice that they have approved that and the transfer is initiated. And so the reason I wanted to bring this up is think old school for a minute when we didn't have the internet and you had to write a check. What is required in the contract? It says it right there, the last sentence of that first section. We have 4 days as the brokerage to deposit the earnest money. It doesn't say cleared, it says deposit. And when we get the notification from Earnest, the company, that the client has given them their information and they've initiated the transfer, that is the equivalent of the deposit. So it's pretty slick. I wish everybody in our entire company would use this whenever possible. It's well documented. Fraud is reduced. It eliminates some paperwork because when the other side requests a earnest money confirmation, we can literally just send them the receipt. Why? Because there's no client account information on there other than the client deposited $10,000 on this property address on this date. So pretty dang slick. Okay.
Well, hold on for just a second.
All
So
right.
that being said, don't we still use the earnest money receipt even if we have this other printed out electronic paper trail?
Yep. I'm not saying you can't. I'm not saying you can't. But
Well, it's not so much can't, it's like, what is REMAX Associates protocol?
I don't use it.
Our protocol is you can use the form or you can instruct an office manager to send over the earnest with 2 N's receipt. It's equivalently the same contractually.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just say, as an office manager,
Yes, please chime in, Colleen.
so it's not required, the earnest money confirmation is not required for us since we have the earnest money receipt. But you as an agent, if you need it to send to someone, you're welcome to type it up yourself and put it in there and send it to whoever you need to, but we don't need it.
Yeah.
I guess that was kind of my question. When we need to send that away, is it gonna just cause more problems to send that
No.
electronic receipt?
I just send the electronic receipt and I never hear anything
Yeah.
from them.
And here's an interesting point. I'm glad I love it when you guys ask questions and we have some dialogue. What is actually required in the contract? Is it
Notice.
earnest money confirmation actually required?
No, receipt of.
It doesn't actually make a hard requirement of it. Now listen, under our fiduciary reasonable care and our process as a company, right? I've touched on this in previous sessions. The DRE came out over a year ago and said buyer's agent and listing agent both have an equal fiduciary to make sure earnest money is actually deposited as per the contract. So de facto, you should be getting a paper trail so that you can point to something that said, I followed the protocols of the DRE and fulfilled my fiduciary of reasonable care and verified that the earnest money was there. But as far as explicitly saying it must be the earnest money confirmation receipt versus a copy of the earnest receipt, the company, there's no requirement. Okay.
When the office or the business office receives that, is the protocol that they automatically will send us a confirmation email, or do I as the agent need to reach out and inquire for it?
Okay, so are you talking about you as a buyer's agent or you as a seller's agent?
As the buyer's agent, wanting to be sure that my client is not in default and that I can provide absolute proof that earnest money has been deposited with the brokerage within 4 days.
So here is the great news, Joyce. We have this wonderful system called SkySlope, and our office managers have a very robust protocol to make sure anything that they receive goes into the checklist tab, right? Because we have placeholders for all of the key documents. One of them is earnest money confirmation. And so all you need to do is, I mean, most agents are going to go in and look at their under contract transactions on a pretty regular basis and just look in that checklist for earnest money confirmation. As soon as they get it, they will send it to you. And oh, by the way, I hope my office managers love me for this. They also have a function to send to you a summary, and I've asked them not to pepper you every time one thing comes in, but perhaps when they're in the transaction once a week, send you a summary, and it will show you the things that are missing. It'll show you the things that are in, right? Just in a summary email. Now, unfortunately, some agents are like, another email, and they click that to spam and they never get it again. Well, we can't control that, right? But any office managers want to, oh, go ahead, Dee.
Matt, what if you're a day late on receiving it as the agent and you have the buyer? We use Earnest, the funds didn't process all the way through. You're at day 4. What happens? And you receive it on day 5.
Okay.
Just in contracts and negotiations.
So
I just wanted to say that I think, if I'm not mistaken, the agent should get an email with the receipt, just as accounting does.
if they've set up their Earnest app that way, correct?
Okay,
Yep.
well,
D, to your question, if something is in late, now listen, I'm going to go into a little bit of a gray area. D, do you work for the company?
Yes.
You are a 1099, but we also have an independent contractor agreement, which allows you limited representation for the company. So if a client were to give you a check on day 4, up through day 4, right? They've delivered it to the company as per this section. Now, obviously, our preference is to get it to the office manager as quickly as possible so we can hit the second 4-day period, right, and get it deposited. But to your question on Earnest, if they don't log on to the app or respond to the request in time and they initiate their transfer on day 5, well, I've had a lot of debates with a lot of agents over this, and here's my psychology approach, right? When you're at the front end of contract, people tend to be pretty pliable, both buyers and sellers, because it's fresh under contract. The sellers are excited. It's no longer the anxiety of sleepless nights wondering if they're going to go under contract. So it is a great time, not 2 weeks later, but on day 5 to be like, hey, we did not get the Earnest money. The client didn't get the Earnest money to us until day 5. Is it okay if I just send a quick addendum over saying that they shall have 5 days? Right?
Okay.
I mean, can you think of very many sellers and be like, screw it, deal is off? Now, if they got a great offer that's $15,000 more, maybe, but that's not the case currently. And most sellers are pretty thrilled to go under contract, but that is the approach. And if we get it, we're going, I actually have some dialogue. I have some little notes that I predefined notes that the office managers can use. And there's one specifically for, hey, if something came in late under our fiduciary reasonable care and per the DRE, we have to let the other side know and then give them a solution. Don't just say, hey, we had a problem, don't know what to do. Make sure that you say, hey, minor little hiccup. It came in on day 5. Just want to make sure we keep our paperwork in alignment. I'm just going to send you over an addendum extending the deadline. Okay, great.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Hey, not to spend much time on this, but there is a reason why tax ID is actually a field, and sometimes we see it not filled out. We see the address, and then tax ID is skipped or skimmed over. Anybody understand why we want that always to be filled out?
Addresses aren't always right. Sometimes they're different depending on how the house is sited. It's
There
tax
you
ID
go.
number all the way.
Corner lots, just think corner lots, right? When they record the plot or the plat map for a development, quite often there's the opportunity for a house to face either west or north or, and depending on where it's facing, we'll actually change the address. And so if you have the tax ID, there's no confusion, no question. And honestly, it usually isn't that big of a deal. You usually get it back from underwriting going, we don't see this address. It's just this way it'll help you avoid that little hiccup in your transactions and go smoothly. All right, we're going to skip.
Matt, can I just say something real quick?
Say that again, Scott.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Scott.
Oh, I was just going to say that do not rely on an expired listings information to be correct. I've found sometimes where there were 2 tax ID numbers involved, or they had the wrong one. They had the one for the lot adjoining and not the one that had the home built on it. So yeah, just double check, because sometimes agents make mistakes.
Yeah, you guys are so bright. This is awesome. I had one like this, Scott, right, where the owner originally had his house and he had a tax ID. He ended up buying the lot next door, and he put like a baseball pitching hitting cage. And to save taxes, he eventually took the two tax IDs and combined them into one. And you can see where that creates problems. Which tax ID are we using? Is it the one or the other, or the combined, or and so you're spot on. Don't just rely on a previous listing, because it could be his house before he bought the other one and combined it for tax purposes. Then you would have a real problem. Okay. All right. We are going to slide down here to, we already talked about closing. And the little situation about recorded is a big deal. It's actually a contract specific term. All right, let's talk prorations. We touched on this a little bit. I just, can you see on my screen here? I'm going to zoom in a little. I put survives closing in the darker yellow. Look at how many times that is, right? It's all over this section, which means just because you go in settlement and everybody signs and it transfers doesn't mean the obligations in all of these sections don't apply. They specifically call out, they survive closing, right? So let's rattle through these really quickly. Interesting, when it talks about prorations, right? It talks about the payment, right? So it says all prorations, including but not limited to blah, 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 if any, shall be made as of the settlement deadline, right? Not the closing deadline. I've had this debate with people before. It's very specific in the contract. It's per settlement deadline. So if, and this is where it gets to a discrepancy, the buyer will be like, well, I don't own it yet. I'm like, yeah, I get it. But you signed a contract that said the proration is only going to go through the settlement deadline, not through 4 days later. And honestly, the dollars are minuscule, but you've all had those clients that, you know, want to count every penny. But just remember, it's contained in the contract, right? Special assessments. Does everybody know what a PID is? I had this one the other day. So we know what a special improvement district is. Do you know what a PID is? Aha.
Professional.
I believe it's a oh my God.
Property Improvement District.
There you go, Don. Thank you. Property Improvement District. And here's what I want you to remember about that. I'm not saying this is always the case with the PID, but it is very common. So, you know, we have these municipalities, cities that, you know, they want rooftops so that they can bring in retail, so that they can build a tax base. And yet sometimes they get kind of crazy in their thinking. We want the really ornate lights, and we need a park, and we need pickleball courts, and we want the developer to do that. And the developer's like, yeah, no, I don't have the money to do all that. And I know you want my rooftops. So what can we do? So the city, the municipality, gets together with the developer, and he says, listen, the fancy lights, the pickleball courts, that's going to be, you know, I don't know, $1.5 million for the development. And like, I'm not paying for it as the developer if you want me to build in your city. And the city's like, crap, well, we don't want to come up with the money. So what do they create? A PID. And basically it is an agreement between the city and the current owners of a piece of property to essentially levy a part-time tax. It will eventually go away, right? When everything's paid off. Good luck with that. The crazy thing is when this kind of caught steam, everybody felt safe because it said all of the property owners have to agree. Well, let's go back to my example. If there's only one builder and developer who owns all the land, how hard is it to get him to agree to this taxation mechanism? It's not very hard at all, is the answer. And so until those things are paid off, with your other taxes, you will be assessed a PID tax on your annual tax bill. So just be aware of that. So
Matt, how common is that really in our market?
Do you know what? It's getting more common, Haley. And
so it would be on newer constructed projects to watch for something like that?
PID has actually been around for, if I remember correctly, in excess of 20 years, but it hasn't been utilized up until, I mean, think about the history here, right? You have the cities and they're like, okay, how do we monetize our budget? Well, they have a number of ways to do that, including property taxes, but then they're like, but we need more. And so they say, hey, we're going to do a impact fees for builders, right? And those have kind of gone astronomical. It's like, yeah, but we need more because we want a new library and we want a new, whatever. And so they're always looking for ways, different ways to skin the cat, so to speak. And so, I don't know about in your area. I know down south in South Utah County, Spanish Fork is one of the ones under heavy growth. They have some PIDs because they want to build nicer communities. They want bike paths, they want nice lighting, they want baseball fields, they want, all of these things come into play. And yet many of the members of the city don't exactly want to fund it because like that's over on the east side. I don't have anything to do with that. And so this becomes a viable tool for them to monetize the things they want to see as they grow and develop their city. So it's becoming more common is the point. So we need to be aware of that, right? When we navigate a buyer through this, somebody asked me the other day, it's like, well, what if title doesn't catch it? I'm like, well, do you know what city you're buying in? And the answer is, well, of course I know what city I'm buying in. I'm like, well, then call the city and ask them if they have any PIDs for this address, right? Because there has to be an agreement with the municipality to have a PID in place. So don't just rely on the title company is what I'm trying to tell you. Okay.
Matthew.
Jachelle.
Yes. I don't know if you're referring to me because I was the one that asked you about this last week. I, in 25 years, had never even heard of that. And the only place that I noticed that it was something to even bring up in conversation was on the buyer's due diligence form. I feel like that was something that was added recently. So I'm like, what in the world is this? And why do I not know about it? So if anybody's doing their consultation or whatever, first consultation with their buyers, if you go through that form, that's a really great way to bring it up. And I promise you, when you explain that to your buyers, they're going to be so grateful that you knew that and that you just listened to what Matt taught you and can articulate that, because it's kind of a big deal. I mean, for my buyers that were out in Saratoga Springs and that Wander community, that it was highly likely that that could have been in place. So yeah. I'm so glad that you knew what it was, Matt, because I felt super stupid for not knowing it.
Now look at, you're just going to be the bright bulb in the room. Hey, anybody want to fact check for me while I'm going through this? Look through the seller's disclosures. If I'm not mistaken, I think they now have an area, I could be wrong, in the new 11-page seller's disclosures for PID to disclose that. So, all right, moving on. Thank you, Jachelle. So listen, section 4, read through these, right? Prorations, special assessments, fees, costs, payment obligations. Now, look at 4.3b, because I've had this so many times. You know what happens a lot of times with landlords? I'm a landlord. I'm assuming many of you are. Landlords shouldn't do this. I have a trust account, not a trust account. I have my own savings account, and people's deposits, my tenants' deposits go in there and they stay untouched, because when the time comes, I want to make sure I have the money, to refund them. But I have had situations come up as a principal broker where a property is being transferred, and it was disclosed in seller's disclosures that there was rental deposits, $1,500 per unit. And the seller's like, well, I can't transfer that because we used it to do repairs. You know what? There's no special carve out for that in 4.3b. If there was a rental deposit, the seller is obligated to transfer the rental deposit with the property, right? Not if there weren't any repairs done. So just be aware of that. And again, shall survive closing. Okay. And then 4.3c, if you see this one that I've highlighted, I've had people try and say, well, it wasn't a transfer fee, it was a XYZ fee or whatever. It's like this line right here. Regardless of how the change of ownership fee is titled, this section will govern it. If there's anything that is required to transfer it, within the HOA or a special improvement district or anything like that, depending on what's selected down below, this contract will govern, right? Doesn't
Matt?
matter what it's labeled. Go ahead, Chichel. Oh, Parker.
This was Parker, but okay, cool. I'm honored actually. Show's awesome. So, section 23 of the seller property disclosures covers public infrastructure district. Just putting that out there.
Say which section again?
Section 20.
Ah, so I wasn't
It's
losing my mind.
Property infrastructure.
Correct. Property infrastructure district.
Yeah. I was trying to think of something pain in, but nothing came to mind.
Derriere.
Derriere. Pain
Yeah,
in.
derriere. Yeah, that's it, Giselle.
All right. Now you can see I've had my blank REPC addendum for a good long time.
Hey, can we go back for just a second?
No.
Yes,
go
come
ahead,
on.
Bill.
I'm curious. So, because I've had this happen before. So sometimes on, a lot of times on a lease, there is the security deposit, but then under that is like a lease initiation fee. And so I've had it come where it's been like a debate between the agents. Look, that lease initiation fee disappears as soon as they initiate the lease. But then on the other side of the fence, like, no, wait a minute, that's part of the seller, or that's part of the deposit, and the deposit in whole is being transferred.
Yeah. So look at the list they give you, right? Rental deposits. That's the first one, including but not limited to security deposits, cleaning deposits, prepaid rents, long-term lease or rental agreements as defined in 61A, right? So if it has the word deposit behind it, it's solidly in. When it's an initiation, I could throw another moniker at it, a processing fee, right? I mean, that's really what they're trying to say with a lease.
Administrative.
It's a fancy way of saying a lease initiation fee. It's an administration fee. It's a processing
Right,
fee.
but it's a subcategory under the deposit.
See, listen, and this is where, we can never document around all of the situations, but I would generally say if it wasn't a deposit, if we could establish that it was an administrative processing fee, then I don't agree. It would not be under deposit.
Do they get it back? That's
Yeah.
what a deposit is.
There you go. Do they
If
have
it is
anything
not
in the lease that says
returnable
they get it back?
to the tenant, it is not a deposit.
Yeah.
Well,
So
let's just say it this way. I haven't entered into a lease agreement for quite a few years. Knock on wood. I've had good, but when I did, it was part of the security deposit. It was a separate subsection called lease initiation fee. And that's just the way that was the state approved lease.
if your contract had it as item A under deposits, I would have a different view. But if it was item 1 and item number 2, then yeah, they stand on their own. So it's going to depend on the doc.
It was broken down into 3 spaces: lease initiation, refundable part of it, non-refundable part, I think. Or I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah.
But
as is always the case, read your document, and I'm always available for a call to look at specific documents. Okay. Now, I touched on this the other week. Utility services. I guarantee you most agents don't know this. Buyer agrees to be responsible for all utilities and other services provided to the property after the settlement deadline. Why would that be? Why would they write this contract that way? Why not say the buyer's responsible after closing, after it is in their name? Why did they say after settlement? Go ahead, Joyce.
So that on a cold winter weekend, the sellers haven't shut off all the utilities and the buyers are not able to take possession until Monday, and they have frozen pipes, and then we have a lawsuit.
I think that's a very good use case. And yeah, it's unfortunate. The buyers are going to be responsible for 3 or 4 days of the seller's utilities. But guess what? They agreed to it in a contract. It's not like this should be taking them by surprise if we do our job, right?
Well, but it's not the seller's utilities, the buyer's utilities, because until this funding and recording has occurred, it's still their home.
Correct. My point is, yeah, it's unfortunate they have to pay 3 or 4 days. Maybe the seller was in there for the 3 or 4 days. Yeah, I get it. But they also didn't have to pay a $150 reconnect fee, or worse, they, like you said, Joyce, they didn't come in and have frozen pipes and have multiple $1,000s worth of damage. So It was written this way by design. Just make sure you speak to it, right? So nobody's surprised. So your buyers are like, well, wait a minute, why am I paying their utilities? You give them all the positive reasons why. Okay. Sales proceeds and holdings. So we talked about this. The escrow office is authorized and directed to withhold from the seller's proceedings at closing what? What can they actually hold back? Paying off the mortgage, trust deeds, judgments, mechanics liens, tax liens, and warrants. What the heck are warrants? I mean, I always thought that was a penal code thing, you know, so there's a warrant out for my arrest. There are certain things that are warranted in our contract. That's what it's referring to. It could refer to a home warranty. It could refer to other items that are warranted in the contract. So let's see how we're doing on time. Okay. So that section 4 is pretty important. Anytime you see a section that deals with money and or timing, boy, I tell you what, those are the ones that tend to crop up with problems. And going back to what we started off with, if you want to be the hero at the end after all of your work, make sure you paid attention to these and set the proper expectations so that people are not frustrated, right? The very definition of frustration is unmet expectations. So if you set the expectations, it's kind of hard to get frustrated. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's hard. Okay. All right. Now on to some fun stuff. Section 8.4, we all know 8.1, 8.2, 8.3, right? They're the exits for a buyer to a contract. And can I just make sure we understand this dialogue? When you talk to a seller, I mean, it's obvious for a buyer. Hey, isn't this great? Look at all the exits to the contract you have. Sometimes it's hard to explain to a seller. So can I suggest a dialogue? I want you to write down just 2 or 3 notes on this. In 2009, the Division of Real Estate changed this contract. There's your first note. 2009, DRE changed it. Prior to 2009, you, the seller, had to warrant the mechanical, the plumbing, the electrical, several things on the property. And the DRE said, enough. We're not going to make the seller responsible for any of that stuff anymore. That should be a good day for a seller, right? You get to check out of the property and go, whew, as long as I did my seller's disclosures right, then I should be in the clear. But the trade-off was the Division of Real Estate said, if we're going to put all that responsibility on the buyer, then we have to give them some pretty clean exits to the contract based on due diligence, appraisal, and financing. That's why it appears so tilted in favor of the buyers. But when you understand the history of it, it's pretty fair. They took the seller off the hook for so much stuff, but they had to have an equal benefit for the buyers. So just remember that as part of your dialogue and share it with your clients, right? That
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't have this on file anymore, but do you have a copy of the old REPC of the pre 2009? I'd love to see a copy of that.
Yeah,
I mean, I remember writing it,
Parker, but I have some agents who are still using copies of the ERS from 10, 20 years ago. So I don't share old documents anymore. And by the way, here's a reason why. These are copyrighted by UAR, right? Which also is under the premise it was written by an attorney. So an attorney or an attorney's organization updates the document. That means all previous documents are no longer approved, aka they're not written by an attorney anymore. So if you're using them, you're in trouble with the DRE. So make sure you use the current copyrighted UAR forms or DRE approved forms. All right. Section 8.4. I just wanted to highlight this one because I don't see many agents use this, right? And it's basically, listen, if we go through 8.1 and 8.2, or whatever the case may be, we're willing to put more earnest money. In a competitive market, why would you not use this? I mean, there are reasons, but why would you not?
Mostly because even agents don't even understand the power of it.
There you go, Giselle. Right on cue. My point is, and we are coming into a competitive market, make no mistake about it, low inventory, rates are improving, prices are going to go up because there's going to be a lot of people competing. Make sure you know this one, right? Listen, if I've done I mean, you're protected, right? This line right here, which says the due diligence or the financing and appraisal deadline, whichever is later. So your earnest money is not at risk until the financing deadline, which is typically the last one, right? So why not make your offer more appealing? It's kind of funny money when you think about it, as long as you pay attention to your deadlines. Why not set yourself apart? Yeah, we're willing to put another $5,000 of earnest money in section 8.4. You think that's going to catch the seller's agent's eye? Yeah, probably. All right. Now, section 9, I want to spend a minute on this one. Notice my little red note there. This section 9 is called addenda, right?
Matt,
What?
sorry, I know, I'm sorry.
That's all right.
That
Go ahead.
dude. On that section, I think Gishelle's exactly right, but also I think it's important to talk about the diversity that this can allow you to, especially if people are wanting non-refundable earnest. You can really break that up. Say, hey, there's $10,000 of earnest money, 5,000 of it's going to be non-refundable, and then just leave it at that, even though you're putting another additional 5,000 to be deposited at some point.
Okay,
so
Parker,
it can't save your client's money.
Your job is to remind me to come back to section 9, but since you introduced non-refundable earnest money, I'm going to jump to section 16 real quick. Notice my note here. Do not, without your client's knowledge and understanding, do not allow them to accept an offer or give up an offer where you say earnest money is non-refundable and released to the seller. Why? You just robbed them of item B as far as a remedy, right? Because once it goes out of the trust account, you no longer jump the hurdle of item B. You must maintain the earnest money deposit in the trust account. So, we think we're pretty cool as agents. We're like, oh yeah, we'll make our offers really appealing and we'll make it non-refundable and release to the seller. And then something goes sideways and the buyer says, I want to sue them for specific performance. And you're like, oh shit. Barton told me I shouldn't do that. You no longer have that remedy. You can either do item A or item C, but B is off the table. And that's true for the seller as well. Okay. All right, back to section 9. I'm going to speed up because we're going to run out of time here. But my point is this on addenda. Please remember this. We see this pretty regularly where somebody will say there are addenda, and let's say it's addendum 1 and the FHA addendum, and only part of it gets signed, right? When you put stuff in section 9, it becomes part of the offer. It is in totality. I don't care what it's labeled. It becomes one offer. And my office managers will tell you this. We get accepted offers back, and I'm using the term loosely, accepted. It's like in my scenario with an addendum 1 and addendum 2 is the FHA addendum. And the seller will send it back accepted, but they accept the REPC. They don't accept addendum number 1. They reject it and they accept FHA loan addendum. What is the status of our offer? It doesn't exist.
Say that again?
It doesn't exist. You either accept the REPC and all of its addenda as specified in section 9, or you reject it, or you counter offer the entire thing. You don't get to think of it this way. It's not a Chinese menu where you get to say, well, I want the chow mein, but I don't want the, rice. And that's not the way offers work, right? It's all together, or not all, or rejected altogether, or counter offered altogether. You can't say we accept parts and then we're going to counter offer other parts. Okay.
Oh, okay. So let's say there's 3 addendum, and one of the addendum is the brokerage commission addendum, right?
Okay.
And let's say that's not the exact term. Sorry, I always forget the name of that addendum. But
brokerage payment addendum.
Yes, thank you. Let's say they accept addendum. They accept the offer 1 and 2, but they reject addendum 3, focused on the commissions. Does that mean that the whole offer's been rejected?
The whole offer's been rejected.
Very interesting.
Now,
Well,
listen.
it depends how it comes, because if addendum number 2 was signed acceptance and then addendum 3 is the broker commission thing and they reject it, then no, you're totally fine.
But the
But
point
if number
here, Bill,
3
but-
addendum is the last one, then yeah, you're
Bill, but the point here is if in section 9 he specified the REPC plus 3 addenda,
I got
then you can't do that. If you reject any part of it, you've rejected the whole thing. The problem is most agents don't even understand that. So they'll still go forward thinking, well, we've got 1 and 2 accepted. No, you don't. The problem is you won't find this out until later down the transaction when somebody gets squirrely and starts lawyering up. And they're like, you never had a contract in the first place. What do you mean I never had a contract? Well, you didn't accept the whole thing. You didn't reject the whole thing. You didn't counteroffer the whole thing. So this is such an important thing that it's like dumbfounding to me that our industry, I mean, this is covered in pre-licensing pretty heavily, and yet we as practitioners screw it up. Just remember, the REPC plus whatever is in section 9 is the whole offer.
So just like you said,
so you have 3 options to a whole offer: accept, reject, or counter. So if you're countering it, every one of those 3 addenda, Parker, plus the REPC should all be checked. Counter, 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 contained in addendum number 4. Right? Now, here's one little exception to this. If in Bill's case, if the REPC and addendum 1 and 2 were all that was called out and you accept it all, and then either side decides to do an addendum after everything's accepted, can you counteroffer the addendum? The answer is yes, you can. You're not counteroffering the offer, you're counteroffering the addenda. And if you don't come to agreement with that, then you fall back to what was last accepted, which would be REPC addendum 1, addendum 2. Okay? All right. So section 10.2, I want to hit a couple of things, different sections here on this front. And what I mean by this is I get a lot of calls about, well, the seller didn't do this and blah, blah, blah. And this is what was in the REPC and this is what was said in the MLS. And let's start with section 14. I actually didn't highlight this, so I'm going to do it real quick. And this line is vital. So I'm not saying to be cavalier about the REPC and the MLS. I'm not saying to be cavalier about the MLS and not pay attention to what you put in there. But having said that, look at what section 14 says. The REPC, meaning this one, with its addenda, section 9, and any exhibits, I'm going to come back to section 9 for exhibits, the seller's disclosures, all of those things constitute the entire contract between the party and better highlight that, and supersedes, that's a good word too, supersedes and replaces any and all prior negotiations, representations, which would include the MLS, by the way, guys, warranties, understandings, or contracts between the parties, whether verbal or otherwise. That is damn powerful contract language. So you can avoid a lot of these problems, but if you get somebody on the other side who says, well, wait a minute, you guys said on the MLS, it's like, listen, I'm not trying to talk down to you. Have you ever read section 14 of the REPC? Because it's pretty important. Can we read that together? And I don't mean to say that in a condescending way, but I mean, if you can do it with sincerity, be like, hey, listen, we did some training on this, and I just want to share this with you because this is where not only I'm coming from, but our brokerage comes from and our clients. You know, the MLS is an advertisement, right? Let that sink into your head. The MLS is an advertisement, because you'll hear people say, well, you're doing a bait and switch. You can't claim bait and switch when you sign a contract with section 14 that you, by the way, the buyer is the one who initiates this contract. This is their contract. It's their language. So when things get to be litigated, it's pretty hard for a buyer to say, well, I didn't know what was in there. It's like, it's your contract that you put forward. You're the one responsible for it, if nobody else, right? Right? So section 14 is a big one when it comes to, well, they said, or the MLS said, or when we were talking, when we did a walkthrough, all of that's off the table. I mean, it explicitly says that, whether verbal or otherwise, this contract now becomes the de facto governing document, period. Right? All right. back up to section 9 real quick. I put a note in here.
Matt?
Yeah, go ahead.
This
James.
is James Marchand. I just got a comment on that. You may get, somebody may include the MLS sheet as an addendum, and therefore that becomes part of the contract and that's relevant. So if in fact that happens, you better make damn sure that everything in the MLS is accurate, because because it now has become part of the contract. Second, if they just send it along with the offer without specifically including it, it has no legal merit.
There you go. You were like right on cue, James. I went back to section 9 and you can see here in red, it said, be careful. I mean, if you're representing the buyer, great, do it. If you're representing the seller, be careful. If they check other and they say exhibit 1, copy of the MLS printout dated such and such, it then becomes incorporated, and the terms in there do become incorporated into the contract.
Matt, sometimes they throw it into addenda also, but whenever it's presented that way, always counteroffer it.
I take it out. I never allow it as a listing agent.
Eliminate it.
It opens me and the brokerage to all kinds of additional liability.
You guys are pros. I'm telling you, that was going to be my
Take it
exact
out.
recommendation. Listen, if you're the buyer, the buyer's agent, throw it in. I mean, that's like, hey, will
Get
you
out.
give me the kitchen sink too? Sure. But if you're representing the seller, I agree with Scott and Haley. It creates all kinds of potential problems for you.
It used to be the norm that Coldwell Banker would always do that. And I would talk to the agent even prior to them writing it and say, don't even attempt to.
Don't even attempt it.
Just like I do with, putting your earnest money into a title company.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, listen.
So I know we're in a hurry, but I just want to make one really quick comment. So Matt, you just said if you're the buyer's agent, whatever. Well, this is my opinion on this, and that goes back to like when we were talking a couple classes back about the the settlement and close it. So like possession upon recording. Well, when I write an offer for a buyer's perspective, yes, I represent them, but I want to write that offer so they can say yes out of the chute. Because if it requires a counter offer, just like you're talking about, to remove that MLS printout, now someone else has the opportunity to submit an offer during that same time, and you're doing a disservice.
Fair point.
That's why you contact them beforehand.
Yep, that's right. Okay, final inspection and walkthrough, right? I don't know why some agents still don't do this. This is, in my opinion, the same category of not going to settlement with your client. These are the culminating events that show you to be the hero. Go do it well, fulfill your fiduciary of reasonable care. So many problems are eliminated. We can catch things, 3, 4, 5 days prior to closing, and they're way easier to resolve than after settlement and trying to get a seller who has disconnected already. Okay. There's a lot more there, but for sake of time, I think you guys get the gist of that. Mediation. I used to strongly advocate for check may, right? Because if both parties don't want to do it, you're just incurring costs for your client. But I've been persuaded that it depends on the situation. If you have shall there, you show up, the other party doesn't participate, or shows up but isn't cooperative, that gets passed on to the court. So there are some advantages. Just make sure your clients understand the difference. If they don't want any additional costs, then check may. If they want additional leverage legally, if things go sideways, probably should put shall. All right, default, we've already covered that. But when we talk section 16, I rarely hear agents introduce section 17, and I see them directly linked. If in the event of litigation or arbitration arising out of the transaction, you have to spend money for legal proceedings or attorneys or both, and you prevail, the other side's going to pay the fees. So not only are there financial consequences to 16, but they can be actually outpaced by section 17. So if you're looking for leverage to make the other side be good actors, and you got to be really careful with this, not to say it like, screw you, we'll sue you. I mean, that is the worst thing ever, but just be, hey, listen, I want to avoid this at all costs. And I have a sneaky suspicion that if we can't come to resolution, my clients are going to elect to pursue something legally. Can you please make sure your client. Let's give it the best shot. And let's also make sure everybody's aware that when this goes to a legal route, then the prevailing party is going to get their fees paid and their attorney's costs as well. And frankly, you and me, Scott, we're going to look like the goats on this, whether we're right or wrong. Right. So let's try and avoid it. I think by ratcheting up and showing them how expensive it can be, sometimes you'll get the other side to be like, yeah, you're right. Let's work for a solution.
Matt, this
Yeah.
is James Marchand again.
Yeah.
Just regarding default, I just 2 months ago watched a Realtor 500 guy that's been doing this for 20 years write a check for $50,000 because he misunderstood for 20 years exactly when the earnest money was lost. And he was, and I won't go into details because that's not the important thing. It's just the reminder that we need to review these things regularly, whether they change or not. I think a lot of times when we've been around for a while, we get accustomed to assumptions that are not accurate. But anyway, watch somebody, $50,000, it didn't make him homeless, but it certainly didn't make him happy.
Yeah, listen, thank you for that. That was like a unplanned testimonial of why we meet in these meetings. You're right. Even people, I've had that same experience, James, with brokers. It's like they've called up and told me, well, we're choosing to refund the earnest money. I'm like, should we go read section 16 again together? Not your choice. It's the non-defaulting party who gets to choose the remedy, right? It's like, I can't believe I'm explaining this to another broker, right? Okay, section 18. This one is a big deal, guys. Now look, if we go down to acceptance, there's only 2 requirements. It's got to be signed, right? The offer's got to be signed, and the seller or the buyer or their agent has communicated that it's been signed. I hate this about our contract. Literally hate it. And you'll see my note here, because item B is so loose, what is the best practice under our fiduciary of reasonable care for our clients? Always get a paper trail. I'm going to give you the quick example. New construction. One of my agents made an offer on it on a Friday night. She called the other agent, said, did you get my offer? Yes. Is it signed? Yes, it is. Congratulations, we're under contract. Saturday morning, somebody showed up and offered $15,000 more. All of a sudden, the agent had amnesia. Said, no, I never said it was accepted. I never said it was accepted. This is why my little red note here. Make sure you get a paper trail, even something as simple as a text. So we're under contract. Yes, yes. Right? Saves a lot of headache. Don't get contract fatigue. I found the property and we're under contract. Go the extra step to protect yourself and your clients. Okay. So back to section 18, notices, which includes cancellation, guys, right? Has 3 parts. Must be in writing, must be signed by the party giving notice, and it must be received by the other side. And who? Look, the buyer or the seller, depending on who's getting the notice, their respective agent or their firm. I don't know. Here's a crazy idea. Why not all 3? Send it to all 3. That way they can't say, oh, you did a typo in the email and we didn't get it, or whatever the case may be. And here's a carry on from this section. Internally, we've had this debate lately. Some of my office managers say some of the agents are partnerships or they're on a team, and the paperwork says that there's 2 agents, and this flips, by the way. There's 2 agents, but on the MLS, it only shows 1. Or there's 1 agent on the paperwork and there's 2 on the MLS. So let's use that scenario. Let's say agent A and agent B. Agent A is on the paperwork. If the side giving notice gives notice to agent B, has notice taken place? No, because they're not the agent. And this is why our office managers do such a great job in saying, hey, we got to get these things lined up so that if somebody does give notice, it's to the right parties and we haven't botched our fiduciary of reasonable care. So just remember, acceptance is easier. So add your own layer called paper trail. And then remember, on notices, including cancellations, there is the 3rd requirement of delivery, which means you better have proof positive that it was delivered. And anytime you do it, if I'm sending something to Scott, I'm going to send it to his broker as well, right? And it just eliminates so many problems. All right. I'll let you guys finish on the risk of loss. Just remember, If a fire took place and the damage is more than 10% of the value of the property, either side can walk. Either side. Okay. All right. Time is of the essence. Just remember the default is 5:00 p.m. and days refers to calendar days, not business days. I still get that question. I'm like, oh my gosh, where are you getting this from? Unless, like this last section says, you have some other agreement in writing. Actually, let's read this last section. I just botched that. Performance dates and times referenced herein shall not be binding on title companies, lenders, appraisers, or others that are not parties to the REPC, except if they provide something in writing and are a non-party, then it can become binding. If I'm the buyer and say my seller guarantees and the seller signs off on it, says I will be approved, then that does become binding, right? Or I will be approved by such and such a date. That does become binding, right? There's a provision for that in the contract. So, all right, I am going to there we go. Stop sharing. We ran just a couple minutes late. Thank you for being on the call. Great discussion, great comments. I hope you guys understand this. You make me feel better as a principal broker. Sometimes I have sleepless nights thinking about the crazy things some agents will do. And I know at least there's a good batch here that are actually honing their craft and getting better. And it's proof in the comments and the discussions we had today. Good job. Have a great week, and we'll talk with you soon.
Hey, wait, don't hang up yet. I got one quick question.
Okay, Bill, fire away.
I didn't put it in my notes. Who's your NFL team?
It was the Bills.
Oh, that's right. No, that's okay. You know, they valiant effort this year.
Yeah, well,
I just didn't know if there was something I was supposed to poke, but yeah.
That's
So
okay. When you understand this about me, I watch the NFL, but I love college football, in particular the USC Trojans. So we'll see how next year goes. All right, guys, have a good one.
Thanks.